Wow, 2021 sure was a crazy year for cartoons. From groundbreaking representation, dark and intense season finales, and so many shows that were surrounded with controversy. So it's only fitting that we cap up the previous year of animation by discussing the new cartoons from it that range from good, bad, and controversial. So for this video, I'll be counting down the top 5 worst and best cartoons of 2021. And the number 5 worst cartoon of 2021 is Masters of the Universe Revelation. This was one of the most controversial cartoons of 2021, as the head of the series, Kevin Smith, promised that it would be all about He-Man after rumors that that wasn't going to be the case. However, when the actual series premiered, He-Man was literally killed off in the first episode. Granted, he does come back from the afterlife at the end of part 1, but he still gets relegated to being a side character. And Kevin Smith refuses to own up to the fact that he blatantly lied to the fans. But aside from all that drama, Masters of the Universe Revelation isn't a very good show at all. For one, it feels like it's relying on the audience to have seen the original He-Man cartoon, with how it introduces its story and characters. But since I haven't, I get confused when the characters refer to past events and relationships. And on the flip side, many fans of the original cartoon will be unhappy with this, as they were lied to. The show intends to be a sequel to the original He-Man cartoon, and yet with the drastic changes it makes, it might as well be a reboot. But it ultimately fails at being either of them. Another thing this series fails at is the tone. It tries to have the goopiness of the 80s cartoon, while also trying to be a dramatic story, and it fails at both of these tones, while poorly balancing them. The pacing of the story is too fast, as it doesn't give enough time to show the impact of magic being erased from the world, only for it to return at the end of part 1. Plus the side characters and their relationships with each other are poorly fleshed out. One of the only good aspects of Masters of the Universe Revelation are the visuals, as they look like a perfect elevation of the original He-Man cartoon's art style. However, while there are some moments of nice looking animation, a lot of the action scenes were underwhelming. There are also some great bits of music, although the voice acting can be hit or miss.
For Eternia!
But ultimately, the biggest problem with this series is Teela, the lead character who replaces He-Man, and she's an awful protagonist. Her character revolves around being bitter that she was never told that Prince Adam was He-Man, causing her to lead the kingdom she previously fought for. The problem is that her bitterness comes across as extremely petty in the grand scheme of things. For example, when she is told by the sorceress and Len that literally the whole world and even the entire universe will die unless she helps them, she's all, "You guys lied to me once, so screw everyone." What makes it worse is that she's unintentionally unlikable, as the show wants you to root for her despite her flaws being poorly addressed, leading to flimsy character development. Overall, Masters of the Universe Revelation is just a mediocre reboot/sequel. And so, the number 5 best cartoon of 2021 is Jellystone. Not gonna lie, I was not looking forward to this series at first, as it appeared to be yet another case of taking a random popular IP and just doing whatever with it, which usually results in a mediocre product. However, I became more interested in this show after learning that C.H. Greenblatt was behind it, which was a good sign, as I'm a fan of both Chowder and Harvey Beaks, two shows that he had created. Jellystone is pretty similar to the Looney Tunes show, as upon first glance it looks like a bland reboot, but ends up being a genuinely entertaining show despite how different it is from the previous incarnations. So the premise to Jellystone is that a bunch of Hanna-Barbera characters such as Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Top Cat, and many more live in a town called Jellystone, where they get into wacky and over-the-top adventures. The show reworks these classic Hanna-Barbera characters into a cast that's extremely different to their original counterparts, yet manage to have fun personalities that make the show. And the adventures that the various characters get into are either completely insane, or just plain weird. And the random and off-the-wall style comedy is not only hilarious, but also fits perfectly with the bizarre situations that the characters get into. As a result of all of this, Jellystone is an extremely entertaining and funny show that was a pleasant surprise for me. And the 4th worst cartoon of 2021 is Camp Coral. Long before the show even aired, there was a lot of controversy surrounding it, as it was widely believed that SpongeBob's late creator Steven Hillenburg didn't want spin-offs to SpongeBob, and that Nickelodeon had made this series without his knowledge. I'm not gonna go much further into this matter as it's messy and full of contradicting evidence. So, after all that drama, how was the series itself? The answer? Really mediocre. So the premise to Camp Coral is that it features younger versions of the SpongeBob cast, following their adventures at a summer camp called Camp Coral. Now, this isn't just breaking continuity, but rather full-on retconning the series. Not helping is the fact that they actively tried to make this spin-off canon to the main series, with an episode revealing that Sandy had communicated with her younger self to get her to come to Camp Coral, where she and SpongeBob end up meeting as kids, rather than as adults as we saw in the main series. Furthermore, the movie Sponge on the Run tried to promote this series with a drawn-out scene of the characters talking about how they all first met each other at Camp Coral. But what's weird is that this series doesn't use the same character designs from those flashbacks, and now Mr. Krabs is the head of the camp instead of the cook. Despite all of this, the series isn't any good at all, with uninteresting stories and characters, and almost every single joke falls flat. Camp Coral is also a prime example of why CGI animation rarely looks good on a TV budget. Unlike the movie Sponge on the Run where the stylized 3D animation perfectly captured the look and energy of the series, the visuals in Camp Coral are dull and boring. The animation in this show also lacks the level of exaggeration the main series has, resulting in the wacky expressions and visual gags looking unintentionally uncanny. So, even after all of that trouble, we're left with an underwhelming mess of a spin-off series. And the number 4 best cartoon of 2021 is... Kid Cosmic. Craig McCracken is back, bringing us yet another god-tier show. Kid Cosmic follows the adventures of Kid, who comes across a bunch of magical stones from space that grants whoever possesses them with various different powers. With them, he and a bunch of other characters from the neighborhood team up to fight against aliens who come to Earth with the intent to take the stones for themselves. A comic book aesthetic is used for the show's art style, and it looks awesome. Plus, the animation is expressive and it all flows together perfectly. This show takes a whole bunch of classic sci-fi tropes and subverts them in clever and entertaining ways. On top of that, Kid Cosmic has excellent humor and an incredibly likable cast of characters. Kid himself is one of the best written child characters in recent animation. Sure, he can be a bit rude and egotistical, however, these traits are portrayed in a realistic way a kid would act in real life, all while managing to avoid making him annoying and unlikable. Furthermore, he's a sympathetic character who goes through some genuine character development throughout an excellent arc during Season 1. The show also takes an interesting direction for Season 2 that works perfectly in its favor, including making one of the other main characters, Jo, the lead character of the season, as she goes through her own arc of adjusting to her new role as the leader of the team. And the development of her character as well as her relationship with her mom by the end of the season is perfectly satisfying. Season 3 of Kid Cosmic has yet to arrive, but I'm fully confident that it will deliver, considering how good the first 2 seasons were. And as it stands, it's one of the best cartoons of 2021. And the third worst cartoon of 2021 is... The Prince. Oh boy, just what we needed. Another generic and awful modern adult cartoon that looks exactly the same as every other recent sitcom comedy style adult cartoon in recent years. And it's a shame because during 2021, we received a couple adult cartoons that completely broke the typical format. Even some of the ones that use the same generic sitcom comedy style are at least trying to move away from the terrible tropes that plagued many adult cartoons over the years. But alas, the Prince seems too content with being yet another unfunny Family Guy / Rick and Morty clone. So the series stars a fictional version of Prince George, who is basically a diet Stewie Griffin, along with the rest of the royal family. But don't go into the show expecting any sort of clever satire, as the show's humor just consists of random pop culture and celebrity references, as well as a bunch of lame social media jokes. All of the characters in this show are either irredeemable assholes or downright miserable, and none of them are entertaining or interesting to watch. This is yet another adult cartoon where the people behind it don't seem to realize that being outright cynical and malicious is not the same as black comedy, and as a result, the whole series is a miserable viewing experience. As for the show's visuals, while the backgrounds do look pretty decent, the character designs look outright horrendous. The dialogue is extremely dull, and each episode just drags on until they abruptly end. The one thing I liked from the show were those 2 servants who are married, as they were a genuinely adorable couple. But other than those two, there are zero positive things I could say about this show. And yet it's only number 3 on the worst list, so you better brace yourselves for the top 2. And the third best cartoon of 2021 is... The Ghost and Molly McGee. While the shows at the number 1 and 2 spots on this list are the best cartoons of 2021 objectively, The Ghost and Molly McGee is personally my favorite. So the premise to this show is that Molly McGee and her family move into a house that's inhabited by a cranky ghost named Scratch, who puts a curse on Molly, hoping it will scare her away. However, this backfires on Scratch, as it turns out that Molly is actually thrilled to be living with a ghost. And now, thanks to the curse, he is now binded to her for all of eternity. And from there, the series follows the two of them on their wacky adventures in the town of Brighton. Now, there is no serious overarching story or dark themes, just a fun slice-of-life show with a supernatural twist. Plus, it works perfectly with an episodic format. It's just a chill show with fun stories, entertaining musical numbers, likable characters, and an awesome art style. Scratch and Molly are not only excellent characters on their own, but their friendship is what really makes this show, as their contrasting personalities makes them an incredible duo. Sure, Scratch can be a jerk to Molly at times, but it's also shown that he desires friendship, so it's not out of left field to see him genuinely grow to care about her. And while Molly is usually upbeat and positive, she does have her moments of doubt. There are 2 episodes that perfectly demonstrate this: The Greatest Show Ever and Saving Christmas, where Molly gets to the point of giving up, and Scratch realizes that he doesn't want to see Molly completely devastated, and will go to insane lengths to make things right. All in all, The Ghost and Molly McGee is a splendid new Disney cartoon that fits perfectly alongside Amphibia and The Owl House, as well as one of the best animated shows of 2021. And the number 2 worst cartoon of 2021 is... High Guardian Spice. What we have here is a controversial not anime. After a disastrous ad campaign, all news on its progress went completely silent. That was until late last year when the series randomly resurfaced with a full season releasing on Crunchyroll. And it ended up being far worse than anyone could have ever imagined. So anyway, the premise to this series is that in this generic fantasy world with no personality, 2 best friends, Rosemary and Sage, attend High Guardian Academy in order to become guardians. Even though the show itself doesn't actually explain what a guardian is, or what they specifically do. And from there, the series follows the characters as they go on fantastical adventures and form lifelong friendships. Now, I've already covered this show in more detail in a previous video, so I'm just gonna summarize the main problems with this show here. To put it simply, this show fails at literally everything. The story is clunky with slow pacing. None of the characters talk like normal people, with bizarrely awkward dialogue. The writing is awful, as basic story elements and world building are poorly handled. The characters are nothing more than generic archetypes with bland personalities and shaky development. The animation is horrendous, with choppy movements, ridiculous errors, and stilted fight choreography. The visuals are incredibly poor, as it attempts to go for an anime-inspired style, only to end up looking like a cheap imitation. None of the character designs or backgrounds pop, as they look bland and generic. And finally, the show overall is just boring, as it feels like a chore to get through. It tries to go for a cutesy tone, but it fails at being genuinely charming. And when it tries to be dark and edgy to justify that content warning at the beginning of each episode, it fails miserably. My advice is to stick to real anime, instead of wasting your time with garbage like this. And the number 2 best cartoon of 2021 goes to... Now, the number 2 spot goes to what is probably the most talked about cartoon of 2021. It is a gritty, yet thrilling take on the superhero genre, as well as the provider of some of the most popular memes of last year. I am, of course, talking about... Now, in this age of excessive superhero content, Invincible is a breath of fresh air, as it subverts the typical tropes of the superhero genre in ways that are clever and interesting. In order to create a compelling narrative that starts off as a simple tale of a young superhuman being taught the ropes of being a hero by his father, but quickly becomes one of the most brutal animated shows out there. So the series starts off with Mark Grayson, son of Omni-Man, the greatest superhero in the world, as his powers finally kick in, and so he decides to follow in his father's footsteps, and becomes a hero who goes by the name of... The first episode lures you into a classical and light-hearted story involving the relationship between a father and his son. Only for the true nature of the series to hit you right in the face at the end, where Omni-Man murders the entirety of the world's top superhero team in a gruesome fashion, with its motivations kept completely in the dark. From there, the show follows two central storylines. One on Mark as he adjusts to his new role as a superhero while balancing his previous life as a regular teen in high school, and the other being the growing mystery of why Omni-Man killed his fellow heroes and what his true motivations were, as other characters grow suspicious of him, which keeps the audience in suspense. And these two storylines come clashing together in the Halloween season finale. Meanwhile, there are several other interesting side stories that help flesh out the world and the characters that live in it. All of the show's characters, except for Amber, whether they're the main or supporting ones, have great personalities and excellent development. Plus, each of them is entertaining in their own unique way. While there are occasionally bits of poor visuals, the animation is phenomenal when it comes to showcasing the enthralling action sequences. The writing does a fantastic job at building up the drama, while also balancing it with small moments of hilarious humor. For all of these reasons and more, I cannot recommend enough, and it is well deserving of the number 2 spot on the best list. Alright, before we go through the number 1 spots for this list, let's go over some honorable and dishonorable mentions. Starting with the honorable mentions, we have Dogs in Space. Not much to say here, just a fun and cute show with great animation. Myra and the Free. Horia Gugarius' art style is absolutely glorious. However, aside from the pretty visuals, I wasn't too interested in the story and characters. Plus, a lot of the humor fell flat for me personally. Centaur World. I know this show is popular amongst other cartoon fans, but it wasn't my cup of tea. The goofy and silly tone wasn't all that entertaining due to many of the jokes falling flat, and the more serious story elements weren't engaging enough. Plus, I feel this show doesn't do as good of a job at balancing the serious and silly tones as well as other shows of a similar style did. However, I can still see how Centaur World appeals to others, plus the music is awesome. Inside Job. I give this show some props for having a more interesting concept, other than the same generic comedy sitcom premise like with most other modern adult cartoons, along with having incredibly likable lead characters. Unfortunately, in my opinion, this show still falls into some of the same problems of other mediocre modern adult cartoons, such as using that same identical art style that others use, the majority of the humor being weak, and most of the other side characters being uninteresting. And now for the dishonorable mentions. Rugrats 2021. This is such an odd reboot. On the one hand, it follows the same format of the original show, even going as far as to try and replicate the tone and feel, and I can appreciate being faithful rather than changing to the point of being unrecognizable. However, the transition to 3D animation was very rough, as the charm and uniqueness of the original show's art style is lost, and the visuals end up looking uncanny for the wrong reasons. And then there are the bizarre changes to the characters, such as aging down Susie, making Grandpa Lou a hippie, turning Stu into a generic gamer instead of an inventor, aging up Kimmy along with her no longer being Chucky's stepsister, and finally getting rid of Howard altogether. I mean, I get he was an absurd proposition and all, but still, why? Rugrats 2021 tries to be the same show as the original, but all of these odd differences make it weird. The Harper House and Chicago Party Ant. Both of these shows are similar, as for the most part they're yet more mediocre modern adult cartoons, with the samey art style, poor animation, and dull humor. However, there is one major thing I can give these two shows props for, and that is having lead characters who are actually likable. Debbie and Diane, while having their flaws, have good hearts, and they genuinely care about their families, which is something I miss in adult cartoon leads. Alright, now on to the number 1 spots. And the number 1 worst cartoon of 2021 is Santa Inc. And we have yet another show I briefly covered here on this channel, so once again I won't go into too much detail here. Santa Inc. represents the worst aspects of modern adult cartoons. The humor is awful, from the juvenile gross out, the cheap sex and drug jokes, random references, and of course, swearing. Lots and lots of swearing. And rather than having proper black comedy, the show is just plain cynical for the sake of being cynical. None of the characters are interesting, as they're either one-dimensional misogynists or unintentionally unlikable protagonists. and any opportunity for meaningful character development is thrown out the window, because the show would rather push an agenda than have a well-written story and characters. And the show's main character, Candy Smalls, is a perfect example of this. The show tries to present her as a flawed, yet well-meaning protagonist fighting for social justice and equality, when in reality, she's just as despicable and vile as the sexist male antagonist. There are scenes where the other characters say she's a kind person, and yet her actions prove otherwise, such as purposely leaving a man she hit with a vehicle she was driving to die just for being a jerk. That is because the show wants to push a feminist message, and by that I don't mean the kind that seeks real equality, but rather the hypocritical and misandrous kind that relegates the once great movement to being about generalizing men as evil. The show hits you over the head with its backwards message with no subtlety or nuance at all while pushing double standards. The one good aspect of this show is that the stop-motion animation is actually pretty good. Unfortunately, the abysmal humor, writing, and characters make Santa Inc. easily the worst cartoon of 2021. And the number one best cartoon of 2021 is Arcane. I know it's a cliche at this point to say this, but I have never played League of Legends, and yet I absolutely adore Arcane. This show is incredibly well made, from the god tier visuals, voice acting, and music. The animation looks absolutely glorious, especially when the show mixes both 3D and 2D animation, and thankfully it's both style and substance. The series follows several intersecting storylines and characters that are all tied together perfectly to create a truly compelling narrative, with dark themes that are presented splendidly. The action scenes are gritty and intense, and yet despite the harrowing nature of this series, there are some truly heartfelt moments within it. Despite the clear political themes in the show, at no point does it feel like an agenda is being pushed or that the writers are shoving their views down your throat, which is something that's very hard to find in modern media. Instead, the politics are integrated into the narrative the proper way, so that it feels like an organic part of the story. Many ideologies are at play here, and they're presented in a nuanced manner, showing both the strengths and weaknesses of each of them, all while showing how each character understandably has their beliefs. Nothing is black and white when it comes to the conflicts and themes, as there is no clear or easy right or wrong answer, much like real life, which works all the better for the story. Arcane is truly a masterpiece of animation, and easily the number one best cartoon of 2021. And that was my list of the top 5 best and worst cartoons of 2021, and hopefully 2022 will continue to deliver us more great animation. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to give it a like and comment. Also, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell for notifications. I would also like to give a shout out to my $10 Patreon, John Waller6. If you too would also like to shout out in my videos or just want to help support the channel, then head over to my Patreon. Well, I got nothing else to say, so see ya.